Okay, in this video, I want to talk about the second half of chapter 11 of the Sosa paper. And I want to start off by just clearing up something I ended with a little bit of confusion on last time. Sorry. Right here at the end of the first half of chapter 11, you have this thing about the Society of Wishful Thinkers. And the part that really matters here is this bit about cognitive justification. So the deal is, even in a society where wishful thinking happens to just lead you in the right direction as in like it leads to more happiness and like you actually end up flourishing as a result of just like wishful thinking. Even in that case, uh, cognitive justification is not achieved by wishful thinking because the sort of justification that distinguishes true belief that is knowledge from true belief that is little more than a lucky guess is just not wishful thinking. It doesn't matter, even if wishful thinking is effective in leading you towards happiness and whatever. Uh, it's just not the case that wishful thinking is the sort of thing that leads you to knowledge. And this feels a little foot stompy, and maybe is, as in like I feel like Getty, or not Getty, or sorry, Sosa is just saying something like this just isn't the case. But there's also a little bit of there's some hint of an argument here, and I think it would be worth fleshing out. But regardless, what I said last time was slightly wrong. Okay, now let's just remind ourselves what's happening in this paper. So go all the way back to the beginning. And what's going on here is he's trying to understand the relation between epistemic coherence and intellectual virtue. Okay, those are the two concepts we're investigating the connection between. And in the second half of the paper, that investigation gets kind of much more serious. And so let's just get started on that. He wants to begin by just reminding us of this argument that we saw didn't work. He called this argument AR. And it's this argument that looks like induction. And maybe it even is induction, but what Sosa wants to say is that we can't use this as a way of establishing that some source is reliable, because in order to do so, we have to use that this is not only true, but justified. And in order for it to be justified, we just have to assume that this source S is reliable, but that's exactly our conclusion, so we will have assumed our conclusion. And that's not how good arguments work. Okay, so we can't use this argument to establish the truth of this conclusion. Nonetheless, Sosa wants to point out that we may reason in accordance with AR and not be incorrect in doing so. And this feels like it's a contradiction. Like you can't use this to establish its conclusion. How can you reason in accordance with it? And the basic idea is, well, if you just came to know the premises somehow, if you did in fact happen to come to know these, then you could conclude this. And so you could come to know that, right? So you could reason your way. If you had somehow reasoned your way to the premises, it's licensed for you to reason your way to the conclusion. You will not thereby have learned something new because the conclusion is contained in this thing, but that's okay. This may nonetheless be, in some sense, how we end up coming to recognize our sources as reliable, even though this causal method by which my brain happens to recognize that certain things are causal is not like a deductive argument that establishes the reliability of it. And so that's kind of an important point. Now, what he wants to do with this is to say that like part of what's going on here is that like, well, maybe there's this like general sort of coherence at play here. And so he mentions this newspaper case, which I didn't cover in the previous video, but was in the reading. Hopefully you did the reading. The newspaper case is this where you're reading and like you read this newspaper reliably, every day, and you say the newspaper is a very reliable source. It tells the truth. And someone's like, how do you know it tells the truth? And you say, well, it reported on this story, and that story turned out to be the case. And they say, how do you know it's the case? You say, it was in the newspaper. We recognize that this is very bad. You can't use the newspaper's reporting as a reason to believe the newspaper's reporting. And what Sosa points out here is that what's wrong in that case is just that the only thing you're using to support the reliability of the newspaper is the reliability of the newspaper. Now, you might include that as part of your data, but you would want a bigger data set from which to conclude that the newspaper is reliable. So what is wrong in the newspaper case is the narrowness of your purview in judging the newspaper reliable. It's the fact that you only use the newspaper to judge the newspaper reliable. And maybe if you just use, maybe if that was just part of your evidence, like, well, it's been reliable in the past, that can be part of your evidence. As long as there's a lot more to it, you might say like, well, you know, and I confirmed it from other sources, and I personally witnessed some of the events, and, you know, and so on and so on. And so maybe comprehensive coherence is a legitimate court of last appeal. You say like, it coheres with my general picture of the world. Okay. And this seems like it would solve the problem of this sort of argument, because what we could say is like, well, both of these fit coherently with the story I'm telling. And so then that provides evidence for this being true. And also it seems like it'll solve the Sellers issue, right? So where we had effective agencies. Remember Sellers was saying like, look, it appears that I can get around in the world. I'm much better off if I believe I can get around in the world and I'm not just being forced about by unseen forces. If I don't have the ability to introspect and trust my introspections, then I can't have this effective agency. So it's in my best interest to believe that my introspections work. And that's what Sellers said was sort of the motivation for believing your introspective evidence was good. And Sosa had ruled that out, and now he's coming back to it now that we have this sort of coherence view on hand. He says, you know, maybe we can indeed use this effective agency as a rationale, but the way we do so is not by just saying like, look, you have to gather effective agency, but, you know, our effectiveness as agents adds comprehensiveness and coherence to our total body of beliefs. So that is, since my assumption that my introspections are accurate sort of confirms that I am an effective agent, and since my being an effective agent sort of makes my views more coherent overall, that seems like it gives some sort of evidence to the idea that my introspections are accurate. Okay, so that's the thought. And so if we want to like express the thought we're having right now, this like some sort of coherence of like a worldview is what matters. Here's how we would express it. We would say, according to coherentism, what justifies any justified belief is its coherence with a sufficiently comprehensive and coherent body of beliefs. Now, I want to stop here. I'm going to stop the video here because the next thing we get to is the objection, and it's complicated and difficult to understand. So maybe take a minute to read it, and after you've read it, come watch the next video. Okay, so I'm going to stop there.